Please, gentlemen and ladies, feel free to leave if you finished eating. You don't have kayak to stay for the second part. It's fine. There's no akbara. You finished. You ate. You benched. You're good. Where's the sign? You already heard. Moshe said you already heard all shit. Another hour and a half, 2 hours, 5 hours. You know, we'll try for an hour, but it's more likely 2 hours when it comes down.
I'll stay for a while.
Yeah, stay for a while. No, but you shouldn't feel really.
You ready to that?
Huh? Can't hear what you're saying. I'm saying if you need to go, please go. That's all I said. People shouldn't feel they shouldn't feel they have to stay.
So what do I do?
What the soup you have to send in. There's no way you can finish this. You can put it back over there, put it back into the bowl, we'll reheat it if you want. Afterwards you can eat it.
I will eat it after.
So put it over there. Put it on.
Clear table, clear mouth.
Maybe get like is there like a plastic plate or something you can put in the
It's always reheatable, yeah.
It's reheatable, yeah. Sure. Good. There's a large plastic plate we could put it on the tree. I mean, let's save it.
Saving this?
Yeah. We'd like to save it.
You studied in Chicago, didn't you?
It wasn't Chicago, yes.
Good cousin.
That's something else. I drink with an old. This doesn't fix the bush. I'll be able to as an extra source. I don't know. What was this? So they don't. No.
Should we turn the computer around so that he doesn't have to look at himself?
Yeah, I thought Ira was going to be.
I could do that. I could.
You're busy. It's fun.
I've done that in the
So it
past.
doesn't matter. I've gotten used to it. Okay, welcome to part 2 of our Siyum on Seder Nashim, Tafshin Ayin Vav, which is the 17th Yahrzeit of Mary. And some of the things, what we spoke about until now is we looked at the end of the Masechet Kiddushin. We saw that there was a stira between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Norai. It's supposed to be the same person, which makes it a little bit difficult. We saw that there's 2 inyanim in the Masechet Bechlal, one of which is the relationship to Nashim, and one of which seems to be the worries about the relationship to Nashim, which closes the whole Masechet with the inyanim of Yetzer, the dangers that can come through Yetzer and the way that it affected Ravam Gaon, and Ravam Chasida, and Rabbi Akiva, and many other Gedalim, that the Satan was there to teach them a lesson. And then we recognize that the truth is the 2 dargas of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Noroi, are 2 dargas in Masechet Kiddushin, which are the 2 dargas in Seder Nashim, one of which is Chaysen, and that's Asor Yuchsen, that ends the entire Masechet. And the other is, as Rabbi Noroi says, I wouldn't teach my children anything but Torah. The other is Teras Hashem Demima Mishivas Nafesh, which the Medrash says is an alternative structure to Seder Nashim. And of course, all of the Shisha Sidorim change according to that development. It's an entirely different structure, one that Rebbe did not take in the order of the Shisha Sidorim Mishnah. It's a different way of looking at the Shisha Sidorim. And the aspect of Teras Hashem Temima is the close of the Masechet, and the Asor Yuchsin is the Inyanim of Chosen, which is Rashi says, is the way in which we come to have heirs. And Chosen is the way in which we talk about Nachal. And because of that, we went to the Parsha in the Torah, which is, of course, this week's Parsha. It's the Parsha of Pinchas, that actually deals with exactly the issues of Yichus, particularly, of Chosen. And it turns out that as Eliyahu Navi, Pinchas ends up dealing with Torah in terms of Shiva Kiblu Kol Adam Kolo and Teku. And that we look at Eliyahu Navi as the one who, in the end, is going to answer all of our abayas. So that the 2 aspects of Pinchas, which relate to the idea of Yerushas Haaretz, which are very much part of the sugyas that close the Masechet, which is Znus, the aspect of Znus, and the way that that relates to Yuchasin, turns out to be the way that the Torah demands that we relate to the Torah itself, because Torah Hashem Tmima B'Shivas Nafesh demands Sifra Yuchasin. The moment that there's a pagam in Sifra Yuchasin, and the Umays can say that they're already doing Lanu, we lose our special rights to Torah, we lose our specific relationship to Torah. And it turns out that the Bechia that characterizes this period is a Bechia that comes from an inability to assert that special, unique Kedushas Yisrael, which even Moshe Rabbeinu was unable to assert. And the idea of Pinchas being the one who turns into the Malach, who is capable, even Lasi Lavai, of being Miyaches Tishvati, and that's his entire vision, is the same way that the Torah was Miyaches in here in order to give him the right to have done what he did, which doesn't make sense. But Pashtas, it's either right or wrong. It has nothing to do with who you are, and yet the Taina of all of, as the Gemara says, whether it's the Malachei Asharis, or whether it's the Shvatim or Mavazim, or whether it's the Rosh Sanhedrin, everybody was being Mavazim because of who he was, not because of what he did, which is an astonishing change. Because we know that the Talmud Chacham, Mamzer Talmud Chacham is Gadol from the Kohen Gadol who's in Amoret. So what do we care about the Yichus? If the person is telling you what the emes is, why all of a sudden do the Malachei Asharis have a tain on him because he's been Putiel? And so what? So his grandfather was Mefatim Agolis Lavadis Kechovim. And what's wrong with that? And Kosh Baruch Hu didn't call a Parsha the Torah Yisro. That's the guy who was the Mefatim Agolis. And it turns out that for some reason he's absolutely right. The Shvatim are absolutely right. It's just that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that I'm Miyachesim Tahara, and therefore he's indeed the correct man at the correct moment, and he did what needed to be done, and therefore it's okay. And but I agree with you. Had he been, in fact, Miyuches to Putiel solely in terms of Yisrael, there wouldn't have been an answer for him. Where is such a thing? If what he did is good as one identity, so it can't be good as another identity. So this means that the definition of your place on the earth and the identity that you achieve with the life that you have is very much a function of Yichus. So if you're coming to be Kovea, as the B'nai Slavchad was your Kovea, the Chukat Mishpat, and define the nature of Yerusha of Eretz Yisrael for Klal Yisrael. He is coming to define Kedushas Yisrael for Klal. So because of that, he becomes very, very much a part of the entire relationship to the concepts of Seder Nashim, whether they're concepts of Chosen, which is the way that the Gemara in Shabbos brings, is the concept of the idea that lies behind Nashim, or whether it's the concept of Teres Hashem Tanima, which lies behind Nashim, according to the Medrash and Tehillim. The idea is that both of them are fundamentally Pinchas orientations, because of which he becomes a malach who deals with the very bechia that here he needed to deal with the Hema Bochim. He establishes the town, the actual place that is called Bochim, after Knis Haaretz. He becomes the one that defines Yerushas Haaretz in terms of Bnei Gad of Bnei Ruvain and the civil war, the incipient civil war that was averted because of Pinchas. It's entirely him and his negotiations. He is the malach that acts as the meraglim at the time of Rochav. He says, I'm a malach and I don't need to hide. I could just say, I'm not the Pinchas you're looking for. No, we're not the Pinchas you're looking for. Everything is fine, because after all, he is indeed malach Hashem Tzvakoto. He, because of that, is the person that ends up bringing Rochav HaZayna to Yoshua to become Yoshua's wife. You understand that this is all part of exactly the same story, but it sounds like the inverse. Over here he's going, Dafka, he's going to bring an Isha who is a Zayna, after killing the Nashim will become the Zaynas, but who were really the correct Nashim. It's a very strange story. Ultimately turns into Eliyahu Navi, as a Talmud Elisha who deals with the Nashim and the Almana and all of the elements that are so sensitive and so aware of all of the problems of reproduction and the tefillah for a childless woman and everything that's involved, which leads to Tchias HaMeis, the craziest kind of things. All of this comes from a parsha that is completely dedicated, whether it's in terms of Shiftei Ka and the Shvatim, whether it's in terms of Pinchas as an individual, whether it's in terms of Benos Salavchad and the unique position that they have in Yerushas Haaretz, which goes all the way back to Yosef HaTzadik, where it the bracha benot tzadot alei shur, says the Medrash, that's a reference to benot Salavchad, because the shur represents a wall that's in the middle. What is the wall in the middle? The Yarden, like Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain said. The only people that were Yerush on both sides of the Yarden are benot Salavchad. Why benot Salavchad? Because there were really only 6 mishpachas in Menashe. But it says Eser mishpachas, it says in Yehoshua. Why there Eser mishpachas? Because benot Salavchad created another 4 mishpachas, simply by virtue of the fact that they took Salavchad's chelik, they took the chelik HaBechor of Tzlavchad, they took Tzlavchad's chelik in his Yerusha as a Pashat, and he was also Yerusha brother. 2 of them are on one side of the Yarden, 2 of them are on the other side of the Yarden, which becomes the Chibur of Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, or one side of the Yarden, with the rest of Klal Yisrael on the other side of the Yarden. And Menashe, that takes Chetzi Shevet Menashe, become the Chibur of the 2 pieces of Klal Yisrael that are inherent on the 2 dargas of Eretz Yisrael, which become here the 2 dargas of Nashim, which is Nogea, the 2 dargas, as we'll see in our Masechet as well. So it's a very, very complex Nakuda in Pinchas that we need to understand. What is it that he was capable of relating to and understanding that gave him a totally different take on what it's possible for a person to achieve, how it is shayach for him to stand up to such an extent that the Malach HaShoros were forced into a position. The Gemara talks about it, 6 different nisim that took place in order to allow Pinchas to achieve what it is that he achieved. And the achievement, it sounds to us a little bit, he's got to necessarily spear people through their genitals. So what if he misses a little bit? I know that's the whole idea is he's bringing shish kebab. He's got to show everybody what's going on. And therefore the malachim have to come, they have to lift up the door for the oil, that he should be able to come out and that they shouldn't fall off. And he risks his life because anybody could kill him. He has a din of a raidef. And if Zimri had turned around and shot him, he would have been perfectly correct to turn around and shoot him, and so on and so forth. But crazy kind of stories that seem to us to be a small issue, and that Lamaisa end up being the 24,000 that died. And as we'll see, those 24,000 are negate the entire Kilkal HaTorah in the time of Rabbi Akiva. Those become the 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, who died because they're not mechabdim zedze, which, as the Medrash says, is exactly what Zimri was getting, that he was an individual, had no kavod lo lamala, no kavod lamata, and that no kavod becomes the 24,000. And this is like a shaktim, and yet Lamai says we don't. This is all just a review of what we spoke about in the first section. I'm just bringing you up to date in case you weren't there. And as we know, the element of those 24,000, that was the Gemara says the world was dark, the world was hopeless, and this itself becomes part of the Bechia of our time that is linked to Kabbalah Sater itself and to all of the problems that we have, and we brought us up to the strange interrelationship between the Maisa Egel, the Shviras Haluches, the way in which this has to do with Znus, and that Lo Avdu Yisrael Avodah Zarah Lo Hatir Lehem Harayos B'Far Hesya, which becomes part of the Tikkun over here Keneged Pa'or, which the Medrash says is Gadol Mishal Maisa Egel. And so somehow or other, the interrelationship is completely and totally, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes us totally for granted. Because, he's talking about, just because of this silly stuff, 24,000 people need to die, but the Torah says 24,000 people were for Pa'or, not for the Shish Kebab. So why does he sing Al Elu Yumtu? It says Al Dvar Par. It says Beferish Al Dvar Par. Why is he ignoring Al Dvar Par? What did he have to do with the Dvar Par? He was only interested in the sexual aspects. Where's the Dvar Par Bechla? And this is, the whole thing is completely confused. Was the Maisa, as Balak had seen it, was the Pritza that was going to come to Yisrael because he foresaw that this was Par? Or was it, as Bilam said, Elohim Shalelu Sonei Zima, and therefore it's going to come because of Benos Midian. What's going on? Which one is it? And unbelievably, in that story itself, where Moshe, the Gemara in Baba Kama says that Moshe Rabbeinu made a kal v'chomer that if he's going to go to war against Midian, so Koshken should go to war against Moab. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no, wait a minute, I need those girls. Ammon and Moab I need because we're talking about Mashiach. But that's what Pinchas was talking about. So when he was being sent to Midian, it was bedavka to Midian to make sure that there it becomes the women again. Moavi, v'lo Moaviyah. Ammoni, v'lo Ammonit. So, in other words, the entire creation of Mashiach comes back again to Nashim, and we'll see to a very deep extent, Nogea, these two elements of the aspect of identity that come specifically through Seder Nashim, as I'll explain. And so, versus the loss of identity, which was at the time the nature of the Bochim, and which continues ad hayom to be our biggest problem, the inability to assert identity. And clearly, it's because we don't have it. It's not because everybody thinks we know exactly what it's about. We don't know anything that it's about. We can't even begin to imagine what was Moshe Rabbeinu hesitant about.
In Ezra, they also break out crying on this topic.
Sorry? Huh?
In the beginning of Ezra, they also break out crying when
yes. We mentioned Ezra. Barney is reminding us about Ezra. That was part of the Gemara about Malachi being Ezra, and Nashim Nachrios, and the Bechia was there also in terms of Nashim Nachrios. Exactly there. It's more in terms of Tikkun. Yeah, very good. So, what's interesting is that loss of identity that we have today is very much the opposite of a very strange piece of this parsha. And that is that both of this, the idea of the Seder Nashim and the parsha, and very much of this is between the lines, is not only about the assertion of identity, it's the idea of multiple identities, multiple personalities that are linked to a single individual, the most famous of which, of course, is Pinchas himself, in which the idea of Pinchas is that we view him as being something else, right? So he becomes the Eliyahu Navi La'asid. And we know that, all of the Inyanim of Geula relate to this Eliyahu Navi. So, we have Pinchas, we have the Chavivas, we have Rus, we have the idea of the Geula coming through Rus, we have Esther, Benos Salafchad, we have coming up Ben Av Lebito, and Ben Ish L'Ishto, and then we have the story of Yiftach, we have the Bonos that are Cholos Bechramim, which are part of the recovery from both the Maisa Ega, correct? That's Yom Kippurim. We have the girls dancing in the vineyards. And the recovery from Tisha B'Av, which of course is Tu B'Av. Same idea. The girls are dancing in the Krum. Exactly the same story as the Mishnah and Tanya tells us, right? Now, would you believe it that those girls are dancing because we figured out that Benos Slavchad was only good for one generation? Which, of course, was the whole reason that Yiftach got thrown out of the house. Because Yiftach was thrown out of the house because he was a Ben Isha Zonah, which does not really mean a Ben Isha Zonah, but means, as the Targum says, the son of a woman from another Shevet, which was not supposed to be applicable any longer anyway, because Zeh Davar says only Nogea now. So that means that the entire breakdown, which becomes the loss of the daughter of Yiftach, Beinav Labito, which revolved around the Dorim, Beinav Labito, which was a Chisarn in Pticha, which is Yiftach, because he didn't want a Pesach for his netter. And the one he was supposed to go to a Pesach for was Pinchas. So Pinchas says, he ain't going to come to me, I'm not going to go to him. I'm going to come to some Meshugana and find him a Pesach for his netter, let him come to me. And because of that, both of them were destroyed. So he ends up losing his Evorim piece by piece. Pinchas ends up losing his Nevias for a few hundred years of his connection. It was a disaster all around. And this is the actual Haftorah that comes directly because of next week's parasha of Mochir, B'nai Menashe, where the problem is, in the end, a breakdown in 42,000 people killed because of the war with that happened with the Yoshvei Gilad and everything, the guys that wouldn't come to help Pinchas on one hand, which end up having a lot of impact on our entire history, obviously. So he is very, very much part of the entire story. And this, as I pointed out, began with Mitzrayim itself, in which the resistance to Paro was very much what it was that they had successfully done. So we need to better understand the centrality of these issues to Nashim. But as I said, let's have a little fun before we do that. The fun is to notice the way that there are all kinds of weird, multiple personalities keep showing up here. And it's a crazy thing because it doesn't happen anywhere else. It's only parsha in the Torah that the entire parsha is about multiple personalities. So then we said, Pinchas becomes Eliyahu Hanavi. But before he becomes Eliyahu Hanavi, as the Zohar said, why is he called all the time Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron? Why does it say ben Aaron? And wherever it says, Pinchas points out the Zohar, it always says ben Aaron HaKohen. And why is that? Because he became ben Aaron HaKohen. How did he become ben Aaron HaKohen? Because Nadav Avihu, who had died and are listed over here in the loss of Nadav Avihu, turned into Pinchas. So first, before he becomes Eliyahu Hanavi, he picks up the identities of Nadav Avihu, which of course takes us all the way back to the original Bochim, which is back in Shmini. So when they die, he becomes Pinchas. They take the neshama. That turns the Bechia, that Ein Simcha Mamtenes Al Adam here. And then, obviously, not for nothing does he go Minha Gilgal Al Bochim, because as the Shach points out, it's this parsha is only Shaykh to Yisrael because they are the only ones who grasp the concept of Gilgal, which is Gilgal. So Minha Gilgal Al Bochim means literally Minha Gilgal Al Bochim, so that it's possible to have indeed multiple personalities. So these multiple personalities relate to, would you believe it, the other story of Seder Nashim. The other story of Seder Nashim is Teres Hashem Tamima. But why Teres Hashem Tamima? Because it's Meshivas Nefesh. Meshivas Nefesh is Yibum, which of course is the bunker of multiple personalities, as the Ramban points out, and all the Rishonim point out. So that Meshivas Nefesh is that only Klal Yisrael is capable of recognizing the relationship of a human life to a particular information set that's transferable. So obviously to us, this is not a difficult concept any longer, but you can imagine that up till very, very recently, when the thought of being able to download a human brain onto a chip would have been, I mean, what are you talking about? You know, there's some kind of mystical and non-physical and completely disassociated concept of the neshama that doesn't have any connection to the way in which it could be preserved. There's also kind of emunah that we have, and some weird esoteric mysticism. To us, the idea of splicing, which the Zohar says is in terms of splicing, because we only splice elements of personalities to each other that show up, and they can be unspliced. So it's possible for Pinchas, which later on happens, to lose the aspect of himself, which is Nadav Avihu. Eliyahu Hanavi turns out himself to be made of three completely different personalities, and therefore one of them is a Kohen, one of them comes from Gilad, one of them is from Binyamin. Different aspects, as Barhami Pano identifies, what is the Eliyahu that shows up at the Bris Milah, what is the, and so on and so forth, right? So all of this are ideas in the concept of Pinchas himself, and of course, that was the whole idea of Benot Slavchad. Because as the Medrash says, Benot Slavchad were Chachmaniot. Why were they Chachmaniot? They chose exactly the right moment to come to Moshe. What was that moment? It was being Isaac in Parshas Yibum. So they said to him, how come our mother didn't get Yibum? So Moshe says, what do you mean? Yeah, because you're alive. Your father had you, so he had children. Oh, you mean we're the same as boys? Yes. Oh, so if that's the case, why don't we get a nachla? Oh, you don't get a nachla. You don't get a nachla, then our mother should get Yibum immediately. What's going on? So that, of course, brought the whole thing to the surface, right? But that means that even the question of Nachal over here, which is the Chosin aspect, was arrived at by dealing with the Meshivas Nefesh aspect, which was why they were so smart, says the Mentor, because they chose the exact moment and the exact sugya to be able to deal with the problem in the first place. They have a very straightforward taina over here. Because that means that the discovery of Benot Slavchad, of the nature of Nachla, comes itself through the Gilgal per se. And by the way, just in case you're wondering who Slavchad is, you might know that Rabbi Akiva identifies Slavchad as the Mekoshesh Siyum. So in Achinami, so the Gemara says, yes, that in the Mekoshesh Siyum, whatever happened with him, well, actually, the Gemara talks about this beautiful story, which is the, you know what, if you would bring me the iPad Pro, it's also in my room, that way I can get to the Mekuras without you. It's on that couch in the study. So the Gemara says that there was some Maisa of a certain chassid. A certain chassid was walking on Shabbos, walking by his own Sada, and he sees that there's a pirza in the wall, and he starts thinking, I need to fix this right after Shabbos. I'm going to bring some wood and bang it. And he says, oh my God, am I thinking of doing Melach on Shabbos? I'm not going to fix it. What happens? A caper tree grows right there. It's an enormous caper tree, which of course is called a tzlaf. So a tzlaf chad, one tzlaf tree grows in that space. Umimeno parnasato, parnasat anshe bito, becomes a multimillionaire from that caper bush. It was such an amazing bush. And that chassid was Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi, who, according to the Balei Kabbalah, was the tikkun of Tzlafchad, who was the Mekoshesh. And what he had wanted to do was to be Mekoshesh on Shabbos to fix it with the Eitzim. So by being Mekabel on himself never to fix it, he was Metaken Tzlafchad. And because of that, he was given a Tzlafchad. Now, of course, Rabbi Akiva was the one who darshaned that Tzlafchad was the Mekoshesh. Might also have a little bit to do with the Parsha, because perhaps you don't know that Zimri is actually a very important fellow. So Zim, we know, is Shlumiel ben Tzri Shaddai. Shlumiel ben Tzri Shaddai. We are Shemer, his day of the Nisiyim. He brings a korban. We read the korban, Yom HaChamishi, Shlumiel ben Tzri Shaddai. We certainly don't lock him out of our history. But he, the Gemara says, was Shaul ben Aknanit. Which is the very single person in all of Klal Yisrael in which the Mitzrim were sholet on the woman, and that was the whole story where he called the guy out, and this was the one that Moshe Rabbeinu kills, and so on and so forth, right? So this was Shlumiel ben Tzri Shaddai. Now, according to Balei Kabbalah, Zimri viewed himself as being Boaz, because he was the neshama of Shimon, who was now going to fix the problem of Shechem, you see. So basically, the Nishmas, the tikkun over here would be that the Nishmas Shechem, remember that Shimon married Dinah, and he promised to take Dinah out of Shechem. So that she, Cosby, was the neshama of Dinah. So now Shechem was going to be metaken, the story of Dinah, which ended up creating Ha'aretz Rachavat Yadayim, which stands for Rebbe Chanina ben Dosa, which is Klum Maaseh Bali Yadcha, which is because, as Rashi says, was it? Chananya Betradi, what did I say? I always, sorry, Chananya Betradi, yes, right, which is Ha'aretz Rachavat Yadayim, which is Harbe Schora Balakan Ve'en Konim, which was the entire story of how it is that they got together, and that was the idea of things that...
Joseph's wife also something.
What's that?
Joseph's wife, was she also a descendant of this?
Yes, he's from Yosef. Yes, 100%. Yosef ended up marrying, that's the Osnas Bas Potifera. That's where he comes from, Benos Putiel, exactly. So that basically all of the neshamas over here, it turns out that Zimri becomes Rabbi Akiva, who then ends up marrying Ashes Tornistrophus, who now includes, as a Goya, the neshama of Cosby Bas Sur. So he now ends up being mitaken that, which is why his 24,000 Talmidim end up dying. And since this came as a tikkun of Hamor ben Shechem, Rabbi Akiva says, when I met a Talmud Chacham, I would bite him like a Hamor, because basically that's where the shorish of that Neshama was. It's all from the Rama Mipana and so on. It's like unbelievable stories. Anyway, so and the Maisa just keeps on going. I mean, so when we get to the Rabbi Akiva ends up inheriting a massive Yerusha from a fellow called Ketia Bar Shalom. Now, the story of Ketia Bar Shalom is a fascinating story that appears here. Ketia Bar Shalom is a raya that even though, nothing to do with the person, you see, even though Pinchas was given the kahuna, so Hineni noten lo briti shalom. So the Gemara Darshan shalom is only kishu shalem. But if he has a balmum, he's unable to have his kahuna. So the Gemara asks, but shalom is written shalom. It's not written shalem. So how can you darshan that? So the Gemara says, the vav in shalom is katua, right? So that os is as if it's not there. So all kinds of shagas halacha l'maisa in the Sefer Torah is big machlokes up. Whether if you don't have the vav katua, whether it's kosher, what does katua mean, and how to write it. There's many different minhagim in the vav katua of shalom. But this may remind you of an interesting story. There was a Caesar, says the Gemara, that hated Jews, right? So he comes up with a final solution. He calls all of the Senate together and he recommends destroying the Jews. So he says, and this is how he puts it, Misha alalo nima beraglo. A guy has got a terrible blister on his foot. Do you think he should be yikta'ena? Should he cut it off and live, or should he just live there and always be miserable? So everybody said, of course, yikta'ena. Now there was a guy there whose name was Ketia. So Mr. Ketia says, you can't be Keta'ena. And Caesar says, why not? He says, because then you'll be called a Malchus Ketia. So, everybody's going to say you were the big anti-Semites that ended up killing half of your population. So they're going to call you Malchuta Ketia. So Caesar says, okay, there's only one little problem. Whoever ends up out arguing Caesar gets killed. So we accept your arguments. Now get ready for death. Fine. So they're dragging him away to kill him. So he's passing by Ahu Metronisa. Of course, half of Rome at that point was Jewish, secret Jews, and so on. So the Matronisa says, as he's passing by, what a shame. Here comes a big ship with all of this amazing suyas, and you don't have the meches to pay because you never got a bris milah. So he says, so he realizes that's ridiculous. If he's going to be a ger, you might as well, So what does he do? Nafal al reisha dor say kota. So the fifth katia is he cuts off his foreskin. He said, now I paid the meches. So now I'm going to get into Olam Haba. As he's being killed, he says, Kol nechasai l'Rebbe Akiva v'chavera. So Ketia Bar Shalom, which just happens to be the Vav of Ketia of Shalom, is Katua, in the Parsha of Pinchas, ends up in the hands of Rabbi Akiva. And a Basko comes out and says, Ketia Bar Shalom, Mizulam Machayei Olam Haba, and so on. Of course, all of this is just coincidentally related to Pinchas and Brisi Shalom and so on. But at this point, there's one additional cute little piece, which is that as soon as Rebbe heard this Maisa, he starts to cry. Which is the Yesh Konya Lama B'Shah, Chaz V'Shkonya Lama B'Kam Hashonim, and this is the Bechia of Rebbe. Right? So now, okay, so this guy Zimri was, as we said, was really Shlomiel ben Tzuri Shaddai. And this means that basically what it looked like from Zimri's point of view And what the Shvatim saw Pinchas like was as if some madman happens upon tonight, or last night, and this is a Dechia, which was Shivasar B'Tammuz. Shivasar B'Tammuz was the night that Boaz impregnated Ruth. And that became the Sheresh of the Geula, the same way that Tisha B'Av was the Nefesh of Mashiach. So David HaMelech was conceived on Shivasar B'Tammuz. And that Ramsh works if you analyze the dates, that you have to wait to Shlosha Chadashim from the time that she came from, they arrived at the day of that Rabbas Ha'im, it works out to exactly Shivasar B'Tammuz that she became pregnant. And so that means that as far as everybody was concerned, here's a Meshugana who has decided to save the world from Znus by shooting Boaz and Ruth. And I was supposed to celebrate that. I mean, this guy was coming. Remember, Cosby was the daughter of the Malchus. Shlomo HaMelech went out and married all of those women, right? So, but it's the Malchus of Mitzrayim, or wherever it is, 1,000 wives. No? And she has orders, as she says. I'm not allowed to sleep with anybody except the boss. It's got to be top. It has to be Boshe. So obviously it wasn't Stam Znus B'Alma. The idea over here was the creation of a particular Yachas that becomes at the end, the idea of Ger Toshav becomes at the end Yafas Teyar, and so on and so forth. Boom. So it's all somehow or other takes HaKadosh Baruch Hu to relate it all the way back to Aaron, and that means that this is a tikkun that goes all the way back to Shechem, which was the beginning of Kanos. It was the problem of the relationship of Levi and Shimon. Here is Shimon being taken care of by Levi for not having proper Kanos, which ends up becoming a tikkun of the Maisa of Shechem, which relates directly to Yaakov Avinu's own words about Bisodam, and in there, the part of them that was not correct with Yaakov Avinu. Okay? So in order to be able to make some kind of sense, that's the fun part. But obviously, if the idea of Seder Nashim and its relationship specifically to Yibun and to the Hashavas Nefesh, Rabbeinu Bachya points out, he says, look, it's obviously not a coincidence that all of these tikkunim, especially what it was that Benot Slav Chad achieved here, are achieved by women. And the reason that it's achieved by women, it's Tavu Yisrael b'mitzvah zu yedei Nashim. And you could say, on a simple level, he says, Yitachem omar v'tam zeh lefi shahamita sibat hanachalot. Basically, the concept of nachala is our response to death. I mean, why in the world is there something which creates a continuity, so to speak, between one generation and the next in terms of possessions and nachala? That's our response to death. So because Anashim Garmu Mital Olam, al ken hayta ruya parshat nachalot likateva yidei nashim. Lefi שהנחלה נוהגת בחיים מסיבת המתים. ומה שזוכו לזה בנות צלב חד לפי שהיו מחבבות את הארץ. Because the Eretz is called Eretz Hashem, and it's Mechune Eretz HaChayim. Talk about Barzot HaChayim. So therefore, there's something unique about the Chibur to Eretz Yisrael here, which they were Zochetum, because they were the particular people that were able to deal with the relationship of Barzot HaChayim to Nachala and to death. Now, there are two ways that we deal with death, and they're very deeply interrelated. One of them is Yichusim, which we trace one generation, the sense of Tachas Avosecha Yubanecha. And the other is Yibun itself. In Yibun, we're talking about the restoration of an individual who is deceased, the restoration of that individual to his makom on earth, and to a recreation, so to speak, even of his genetic material. So we consider this to be as if it's the child of the person that we are being miyabe. And as we see in Megillat Ruth, it isn't really limited, and the Ramban points this out, it isn't really limited to what we know of Yibum, which is a brother who died. But in reality, no, I'm okay. But in reality, this story of Ruth is a very complex story of Yibum, in which Ruth becomes Naomi, and not only becomes the Makar of the Neshamas of her husband, but really ends up restoring an entire family to the point that the child that is born is nursed. It's 22 hours. And the neighbors all say, Yulad ben Naomi, which of course is why Ruth ends up being better than Shiva Banim, Tovalach. So everything that was there, the Chachelat Sevatech, all of the local issues that are Nagia Naomi, are addressed as well by the deeper pshat of what it is to have that idea of Yibum. So one focuses on Meshivas Nafesh, which is the idea of Yevamas, and the other focuses on Chosim and on Yichas. Both are essentially tikkunim of Gan Eden. In other words, the groma of Misa in Gan Eden is Keneged, the Maisa Egel, as the Gemara says, Isha Sher Natata Imadi Hinat Naliv Ocha. That means the restoration on Maimed Har Sinai of us being Ke'adam Temutun is because you're Kvuyei Tova B'nei Kvuyei Tova. The Kviyat Tova in Gan Eden that destroyed us was Aisha Sher Natata Imadi. I'll choose my own wife, thank you, and I don't want the wife that you choose for me. The one place in the Torah that Seder Nashim deals with HaKadosh Baruch Hu choosing your wife is Yevamas. So the entire idea of Yevamas is that the Isha is Zekukalo min hashamayim, and he cannot get rid of her. Unless, of course, he goes to the entire Maisa, which is the same as in Rus. Lo uchal. So lo uchal. So we do the whole thing with the Shalaf Ish Na'ala and so on. Therefore, in terms of a Seder Nashim, which is Meshivas Nafesh, Yevamas is its beginning. Because Yevamas is the Iker Nashim. It's the same Nashim that we have in Gan Eden. The one time that we cannot say, it's my wife. It's in fact HaKadosh Baruch Hu's wife. The other is connected the issue of she's Chava because she Aita Ein Kol Chai. That Ein Kol Chai, which seeks itself to be a solution for death, is of course the nature of how it is that the information of reproduction continues for all generations, such that we see it being miyuchas back to a concept of imos, which is the mokar of chiyus, which I would imagine relates very much to mitochondrial DNA specifically, which is carried by AIM and which provides for the chiyus, essentially for the energy of which it's possible to maintain life. But in any event, these are the two different inyanim, which are completely different structures of Seder Nashim as well. So these are not small issues. Now let me try to deal with the conceptual aspects. And all of this was the structural aspects, which are very impressive, very beautiful, very mystifying, and so on. But it's clear that immensely important things are nogea here, our entire vision of what Geula is and how it relates specifically to Nashim and why it's so deeply involved with Yibum. Remember, it's not just involved with Yibum because of Rus. It's involved with Yibum because of Benos Lot, which of course is Ammon and Moab. It's involved in Yibum because of Peretz and Yehuda. So way before we get to the story of Rus, the whole story is Yibum from beginning. So the idea of Yehuda was supposed to be taking Shelah and so on. All of this mix-up is because of questions of the Kiyum of Yibum. Of Hevel becomes Mimakom Acher. And that is, that it's the HaKadosh Baruch Hu was making Zera for Shes, and that Makom Acher becomes Zera Acher, Tachas Hevel, Asher Harago Kayin. What is Zera Acher? Says the Gemara, says the Medrash, Zera Acher is Dafka the Zera that has to come from Rus, because it's totally out of left field, which is the getter of this antithesis when it appears. You understand that it appears antithetical. Because if you're telling me that we could splice identities at will, then you're telling me that the idea of yichusim no longer matters. Why would yichusim matter? This person could have a particular structure of the reproductive history and then be given. All of a sudden he becomes in the nishames of somebody else who's nadav and aviyu, and so then what was the chashivas of the other aspect of Nashim, which is chosim? So I mean, the two of them don't seem to all tie together. So let us think about for a moment the aspect of chosim, which is brought out particularly by Benos Slavcha. And this is so important. Remember, as we mentioned earlier, that it becomes the story of Yiftach, the story of the Yerusha on both sides of the Yarden. It becomes the nature of a war that takes 42,000 lives because of what color kippah you're wearing, or worse, how you pronounce sibolet or shibolet, which sounds even dumber than whether it's a kippah sruga that's orange or yellow, and so on. But it's about the same level of sophistication, it sounds like to us, And this is the difference between the takona of the Churban, which is built on the happiness of discovering that the girls dancing in the Kramim are dancing because Hutru Shvatim Avazabazeh, and Benos Slavchad was a mistake, and everybody thought it was meant to be a serious definition of the world forever, and they end up darshaning Zeh HaDavar, that Davar says only Nogea one generation, which of course leads to the obvious question, if it's only Nogea one generation, who cares? But that leads to another question. Forget about whether Benos Slavchad's need to marry into their cousins is one generation or not. There's a much bigger issue. A daughter that inherits a nachama, as the Bnei Mocher ben Menashe point out to Moshe Rabbeinu in next week's parsha, is ridiculous because it doesn't achieve anything. All it achieves, think about it, what happens? The woman now becomes the Yoreshet. So, and now she goes and gets married. So as soon as she goes and gets married, that means that already a different shevet or a different mishpacha is going to be sholet over this property. So that means that the entire thing that we're talking about is one generation. What's the big fuss anyway? The whole thing was only to get one generation. Because of that, waiting for one generation, they had to wait till they were in their 40s to get married. Because as the Gemara says, they wouldn't want to marry somebody that wasn't right for them, and they were limited to marrying cousins, and that's a big problem. Most cousins are crazy, as you know. So, so it takes a long time to discover somebody that's right for you. So, okay. And what did they gain? How long did they live that they were able to be then from that property anyway, right away? It moves on to another mishpacha anyway. I mean, does it make sense? But the big deal of the chukat mishpat is to tell me something that is a few years of a time, the reproductive time of a human life. How long is that? The woman gets married, marries a husband, ends up dying, end of reproductive age, and then the property goes on to a different shaman.
That generation created the Nachala, no?
No. What do you mean? That generation created Nachala and then moved on to other Shvatim? It was only good for that one generation. So what's the big deal? This, by the way, the Ramban points out that Shem Bat Asher Serach, which is crazy. What is that doing there in the middle of the story? So Rashi says we throw it in because she was still alive, which itself is an amazing thing. It takes us back to Yocheved, who's part of the liminal transition of Ben Achomot. So then Bat Serach would be a definition of the limin of entry into Eretz Yisrael. But the Ramban points out that the Targum is not that Serach's daughter, the Elsha's daughter's name is Serach. Serach's wife's daughter, Usher's wife's daughter, is Serach, and they used to call her Bat Usher, but her real name was Serach. Why? Because she was in fact the daughter of the original marriage of Usher's wife, who had her, and she inherited because the original husband had no sons. So she was the first woman that actually had inherited, and because of the fact that she Perhaps, says the Rambam, maybe she was still there, or maybe it had been preserved, but we needed to mention that family in the context of Bnot Tzlafot, which is really amazing. Fine. Okay, so it takes us back even to there. But the point is, you need to ask yourself, what is the meaning? Isn't the whole concept of the Yerusha that it essentially takes you from Ma'aser Bereishis, and then it follows you through all of the Deiros, and you end up now with the finality of Yerusha Sa'aretz, Lasid Lavai, and the different halakim that are given out by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, as the Medrash says, with each person getting Bahar, or Bebikah, or B'Shafel, or B'Yam, and completely different Sherish and Yahrzeit of Eretz Yisrael, which now brings us, especially when we understand, especially Rashi understands, that HaChayim are Morishim the Meitim. So this was the only time that the dead inherited the life. Rashi's pshat is that we go back to the moment of Yetzias Mitzrayim, analyze who came out of it, split the Chalokim according to who will actually end up entering into Eretz Yisrael, and then go back and split that up according to the Yotzei Mitzrayim. Okay, there's many Rishonim argue, have different pshatim, but it certainly brings out very strongly this idea of a Yerusha connecting the future generations with the previous generations and vice versa, which of course is exactly what the Navi speaks of when it speaks of Eliyahu Hanavi. Veshiv leiv avot abanim v'leiv banim al avotam, which seems to imply that there's some type of integrated vision which Yerusha provides. Now that is belied by the entire idea of Bnot Tzlafot, by the entire idea of a Bat Yoreshet. It means that we are defining the nature of the Nachal of Eretz Yisrael at that particular moment, as Rav Yaakov pointed out, by the significance of that particular moment and that particular Yerusha. Now, what does that mean? What does that teach us about Yerusha? I think that it teaches us something extremely powerful. It teaches us that Chosen means exactly what it says. It means your strength, your power. Chosenum ka'alonim. It's the tzur chasayuba. To be able to be boteach in something. What is the Rabbeinu Bachya? Which is what the Rabbeinu Bachya sees as the shorish of our entire parsha. Now this is Vayikra. Over there, up there should be Rabbeinu Bachya. The idea of the Yerusha, according to this, if Chosen means what it appears to mean, is that wherever a woman lands is exactly where she builds. In other words, the Chosen is the achievement up until that time. It's not the achievement in which I see this as part of a process that does not have a stop. Chosen means specifically a stop. So that a generation is not like the Patek watches, where you never really own it, you just keep it in keeping for the next generation. You know the advertisement, right? You can't really own the thing. That's the, yeah. That, Philip Patek, I think, right? So that is the opposite of Yerusha. Because what that means is that essentially no one ever owns. That's exactly what they say. You can't really own it. Why can't you really own it? Because you're just keeping it in safekeeping. And after all, that vision that the Goyim have of Yerusha is that there's no particular moment of Yerusha. Things are always in movement until whatever, until it's all over. The world ends. Or if you have a concept of some type of tikkun olam until the world is betukan, that's the opposite. Yeah, it relates to it. It's the opposite of Yerusha. The nature of Yerusha, so huh?
Faithful steward.
Faithful steward, yeah. Right. No ownership, stewardship. So the real idea of Yerusha is that it provides the concept. And think about why. Look at how clearly it works out. The ones who are miyuchasim for mishpachot ha'av, correct? The mother doesn't give anything in terms of Mishpachot Av. And yet, those Mishpachot Av are provided only by the Oisios of no znus on the Nashim. If you take a look at the Gemara Kedushin makes the nafkamina in how many dores you have to check behind, right? Chamisha imois and so on. So the Gemara asks, why do we check more from the side of the woman than we do from the side of the man? Right? So Moshe pointed out the most beautiful thing. Because the Gemara says that if you're talking about a man, when men curse each other out, they say, you are a bastard. And they'll say exactly why you are a bastard, right? But if a woman curses out another woman, she will always say, you are a whore, the daughter of a whore, and so on. So the women will talk about sexual behavior, says the Gemara, and the men will talk about yichus. That is exactly, and therefore you don't need to check the yichus, because if there was a problem with yichus, believe me, you would have heard about it. Right? But by a woman, you wouldn't have heard about it. That's unbelievable. So that means the getter of the yichus, such a beautiful R, the getter of the yichus is for the zohar via the shmira of the Eisios Hashem, not to be shaylet on the Nashim, of the Nashim. Okay. But what that means is that the bayit that is provided becomes now the chosen and the chasidus, of which it's possible to have the strength and power to do what I need to do. Now that means, Lamaisa, this is the way that the Rabbeinu Bachya gives his introduction to the whole story of Pinchas. He takes the strangest pasuk. I mean, well, he always does that. But the pasuk that he selects over here is Migdal Oz Shem Hashem Bo Yarutz Tzadik V'Nizkav. And he brings all these amazing psukim of the way that a tzaddik can rely 100% as if he's got a tower of strength. And therefore, he doesn't have to worry about a thing. And it brings pasuk after pasuk to talk about the nature of Migdal, Hashem Sal'i, Mitzudati. And that means that Pinchas, if he has where he can do this from, then he's okay. If he doesn't have where he can do it from, then he's not okay. That's the point. What allows Pinchas to be Kovea Choku Mishpat? What allows them is the recognition that what has been achieved has been achieved. Now I stand on that spot. If you don't stand on that spot, you may have all the terror you want, but you don't have the ability to turn something which was a chayk and kach ksuva lefanai into a hanhaga, which becomes a mishpat in the Olam. Why? Because the nature of the mishpat in the Olam is a translation of what is nogea now. And to define what is nogea now, you must have a mokum from which to define it. Therefore, if you're the wrong guy, you don't have the mokum, it has nothing to do with right or wrong. Of course it's right. But you can't handle it because you don't have the wherewithal to handle it, because you don't have the platform to handle it. So that means that Hema Bochim comes directly from a sense that you have of what we're still in the middle of this process. And it seems so hopeless. And it keeps on reviewing the same issues and nothing ever changes. And we're still back where we were and nothing has developed. And what are we supposed to do? It's hopeless. It's always hopeless. And the truth is that someone who views the nature of chosen as being the exact opposite of hopelessness, because what he discovers in chosen is that things are totally changed. And this goes back to the idea of Shim'i bat Urei, v'shikriet beit avich. All as what it says by the Imois, a woman encapsulates, captures, keeps within herself everything that she had, and therefore was so important for the others to go and to take the wives for their children from the genes of Terach and to go back to Lavan and so on and so forth in order to be able to bring all of that back to Meshivas Nefesh, back into the Mishpacha of Yisrael. But that, says the Gemara, is only because of Shimi Bat Re'i. A bat, and that's why Yisrael is called Bat Nadiv, because of that as well. The possibility of absorbing everything that was achieved up until this time and walking off with it and now saying, okay, now what do we do with this, is the real nature of Yerusha. So that means that the Zohar who searches to be able to do something, to go out, it has no connection to Chosim, to the connectedness of things. He doesn't have that power. He doesn't have that Migdal Oz. He doesn't have that Bayit. Requires absolute Chosim. That Chosim is defined both biologically, psychologically, in terms of the reliability of the Oisios Hashem, that they were lo sholter on the shotechem. But if you have that vision, you are never acting as yourself. You're always acting as the full empowerment of every single thing that came behind you. What's more, you see from here clearly that the more we're able to be Meyaches Pinchas to such a Anhaga, the more capable he is. In other words, it's not enough that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should say, you're wrong. Don't be Meyachesim to Paltiel as Yisro. Be Meyachesim to Paltiel as Aaron. No. I have to say that he's Meishiv Chema, Ben Meishiv Chema, and that he's a Ben Mekaneh, and so on and so on. Well, what's the difference? Obviously, the idea of Chosim is that is directly proportionate. Why? Because it's a true translation. If this is where you came from, that the same way that the sum total of genetic birur that created the actual genes of Yisrael, and that were an actual breeding program for the first 10 generations and the next 10 generations, and then the 10 generations from Peretz to David and so on. Each of those are a description of a breeding program. In every one of those Doros, there was one person that was Roy to pass on the yichud of those genes that ended up coming to Terach and therefore needed to be reincorporated from Terach. This is serious stuff. So that means that when we're talking about and the idea of precisely where you come from, the brachas of Yaakov Avinu and the connectedness of the specific brachas of the specific mishpachas, of the specific mekaymes and the midbar and so on and so forth, this is all a reality that is given to an individual based on the entire history. He's not something that is a flux that continues to be in flow. Chosen means he starts as if the world begins now. That's the real meaning of the Ein Kochai. Once that's true, it means that the power of Meshivas Nefesh is exactly the power of Shim'i Bat. I can transfer to you something that is Nogea, an achievement that's taken place. It's there already. If this is what happened to Nadav Avihu, or this is what happened to Bnei Korach Lometu, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is that we link here to what appears to be just a brief story of history in what ought to be nothing but Yechusim, is because those particular elements really are achievements and therefore are not transferable, because they live forever in that Chosen which is theirs.
I can act because I'm drawing upon
Exactly.
an event, it's the reality.
The actual individual. And that's what the Ramchal writes in one of his Igoras, that even though each neshama is given a particular aspect, that it has a shaykhs to the Oisios of B'Torah, which are connected, the Oisios of Yisrael and so on, right? And that's Yeshish Riba, Oisios of Torah, is Yeshurim and so on. But the moment that something is not functional, the individual who takes that becomes that. This is what I need to do, and therefore this is what I'm going to do. He's given that kaya, totally. So Pinchas, by acting in the mokam of Nadav Avihu, becomes Nadav Avihu. Takes on that vanis and the ava and so on and so forth, which was nogay, and therefore literally becomes a kohen. By the kayach of his mind, he must become a kohen because he becomes those kohenim that were now chaser, and so on and so forth. Therefore, in terms of the kina that becomes Elio Anovi the Kano Kaniti, which brings him all the way back, as you understand, obviously, to the deeper connection to the bris, which makes him a malach bris, not simply the bris of Knesset Eretz Yisrael, but the literal bris of bris milah, which is why we have Kiseh Shel Elio. So why is he called the malach bris? Again, but Pashas, because he says, oh, hey, Pharaoh at bris chad, the Medrash, everybody knows the Medrash. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you think so? So I'm going to make you watch every single bris. You want to say they were made for the bris? For thousands of years, you'll watch every single bris. You'll see how they're made for the bris. But the deeper meaning of that, of course, is that we're talking, going all the way back to Lo Brisi Yom V'Layla Chuka Shemayim V'Aretz Lo Samti, which become the original bris milah, which is just the reproductive, you would think, and DNA element, which then becomes the bris of Torah mitoch Shvuas El Avram Avinu, which becomes now the mimetic aspect of that bris, which is the yesod, as the Rambam says, a yesod of an generation after generation, which is Yodei Hashem, and which becomes more and more meruchak from Avodah Zarah. Because ultimately, the development of humanity as a whole is measured entirely by that one nekudah. How far away are you from Avodah Zarah? The more primitive you are, the less you understand of the world, the more you are of the Avodah Zarah. And that I always say, Peremes is Akum's razor. Because basically, Hilchas Akum provides a razor. And it's a razor of any secondary belief that is primitive and unnecessary. And it strips it away. So that you have to be Omed ala Emes, which is why the Yeseda is Vabud HaChochmot Kulam is Leda, Sheyesham, Motzei, Rishon, and so on and so forth. The more developed you become in that, the more you're Shayach, the Brisa Shel Avram Avinu, which is entirely the development of science, the development of understanding, the destruction of religion, the coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the discovery of Torah, the emes of Torah, and the tmimus of Torah. And that's the idea of tmimus, says the Rambam. Torah as Hashem tmima, says the Rambam, means people that are not stupid, because tamim tiyeh b'Hashem Elokecha means don't be an idiot, to be superstitious or to believe in all types of nonsense that is not part of a tmimus, of a vision, of a totality in which you can check the truth of each point against every other point. That's entirely the Rambam's approach as opposed to Rashi about Tamim Tiyeh Halacha L'Maisa. Doesn't mean don't be Dorish Atidot because you need to rely on God. It means don't be Dorish Atidot because you can't be so stupid. It's an entirely different thing. If the world is meant to hold together between us, so that means Torah can be checked one piece against the other. It's an enterprise. Znus is the opposite of that enterprise. It's the same reason that Ha'omer Dover B'Shem Emra is Mevi Geula Li'olam is exactly the same as the traceability of the Yud and the Hey of the Osias Hashem to be able to know where this is coming from and what has been achieved in every particular generation and how are we getting closer. The moment that you're Isaac and Zeus, you're now Makabal the Maisa. Why not? You're now Makabal Pa'or. Why not? You're not part of an endeavor that starts with Maisa Bereshis and has as its focus the gradual generation by generation growth of sophistication and understanding that dumps every piece of emunas tefillos and turns it into Yedias Hashem. And that's our kol umas davrazeh, says the Rambam. That's everything has to be in order sheyeda es Hashem. Anything that comes in the way of that Yedias Hashem, some silly belief, makes you feel good. You want to believe in it. You don't have any raya for it. You don't understand how it fits in. It doesn't mean anything. It just sounds good. That itself is znus of the mind, which becomes, of course, the Maisa Ego, which ultimately turns here into Pa'or. So it means that all of the things are so profoundly linked. The Teres Hashem Tanima is literally the Chosen, which is against Nus. And because of that, the Maisa Egel and the Shviras Haluchais is linked directly to this Maisa Par, which here becomes worse than the Maisa Egel, as it says. So therefore, Chosen is the extreme opposite of Nus. And therefore, it's because of that Elio and Ezra and the issues of Rus and Takot Benos Moab, everything was in terms of the rejection of Znus. But the beauty of it is that Chosen, in terms of Nashim, is meant to only be for this generation, always. Each Chosen is only meant for this generation. The destruction of the Beis HaMikdash comes because of the unwillingness to recognize that the dancing of the Kromim is itself part of Chosen. Because what it means is that whatever you have achieved is only meant to be achieved for this generation. If you attempt to hold on and say, this achievement is the achievement of Yerusha, then you destroy the Yerusha in the other direction. Either you destroy it by claiming it never arrives, or you destroy it by claiming it has finally arrived. Both of those things are contradictions to Chosen. So it's because of that the idea of Makomi Nichu Mi'avotai Hitkaderbo is part of the essence of the Kfiyas of Choku Bishpat in terms of the Torah. And therefore says, think about Chulin, you can never say, somebody comes along and he'll say, the most incredible Chiddush. What I mean, so Rabbi Meir is going to be Matir, Achila of Dmai and Akor, whatever the thing is. Mikan, the Talmud Chacham Shamar Davar She'en Maslichin Oto, and Mazlichin Oto, so on and so forth. Why? Because remember that all of this comes, amazingly,
It's coming from outside.
all of this comes, I'll hear it in a minute, all of this comes from the nature of death, correct? Nachla is the replacement for death. The reason that we die is very obvious. We die because of the fact that if we didn't, there would be no development. In other words, genes are programmed to kill you. Because if they don't program to kill you, they will not survive. This is what Ben Azai recognized at Kabbalah Satira. What did I say, Ben Azai? I did that again earlier today. This is why Reish Lakish says, Bo v'nakir tova l'avotenu al sha'avdu et ha'ega. Why? Because they got themselves knocked off. Shilmola emas et ha'ega lanu ki'u lo bana li'olam. That's the same problem that biological evolution has, exactly the same. Biological evolution has to get rid of you. Because if you survive too long, then the next generation will not be able to reproduce. Which means that the gene, because you'll knock them off, obviously. There's always going to be competition for mating. So it's always the strongest, the oldest, the most powerful, recognized, that gets his choice of mates. Except that they end up dying. They're no longer strong. Now there's a caning, and the youth knock them off in the end, right? So now the old beaten lion has to run away because the cub is now taken over. That's the whole idea of humanity as well. So one generation, finally the kids rebel. They throw out the old man from the business. Now he's in the old age home, and now the kids are in charge of the business. Classic. All biological nonsense, right? We know exactly what to expect. So that is what Reish Lakish says is true about Torah as well. Because imagine if these people hadn't gotten themselves knocked off, which, by the way, is the whole reason that Nadav Avihu becomes Pinchas. Because Nadav Avihu's fate was, they said, when can we get rid of Moshe and Aaron so we can start putting in some new intelligent stuff? Not as a Kedim Halol are going to be in charge of Klal Yisrael. Nothing's ever going to develop. That's exactly the point. So Reish Lakish says, but that's true about everyone. Imagine trying to say a Kiddush when good old Reish Lakish is still around. They'll knock your head in. It's a good thing they got rid of Reish Lakish. And it's clearly not a coincidence that Reish Lakish indeed got himself knocked off by starting up with Rabbi Yochanan. It's exactly the same thing that he was saying all along. Okay. The younger generation is always in danger of getting knocked off by the older, and so on and so forth. The way out of this is the idea of nachala as chosen, because what it means is I start at the point that has been achieved by those previous generations. I don't just hold on to, I begin. If I just hold on to, then we're back with the same problem, and nothing ever develops. But if nothing ever develops, you're back with Hema Bochim. Is what are we supposed to do? Comes along Pinchas, says the Rabbeinu Bacha. So he says, listen, I'm in a matzav in which it's a migdal oz, in which it's exactly the pasuk that's brought over here in Kedushin. It's the idea of Ya'ufu. What's the word? No, come on. What? What's the pasuk? Come on, guys, you all know the. Yes, but what's the first part of the pasuk? Right? So it's exactly this nakuna. What do I have to be worried about? You know, I can handle it. Everybody's ready to kill me, and the Malachei Shoros are ready to kill me, and Sanhedrin's ready to kill me, and everybody knows that I'm a jerk, but I know I'm not. How do you know that I'm not? Because I know what I'm standing on. They don't know what I'm standing on. Fine, comes along HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, wait a minute, this is no jerk. You're basically talking to Avram Avinu and everyone that came afterwards, and Levi and Aaron, and those that were the Kanoim at the time of the Maisa of the Egel itself, for the getter of Saita, and the Binyan of the Beis HaMikdash, and all of the aspects that were Mesukim that this person comes from. Such a person can create Chukat Mishpat in exactly the same way that those daughters of Tzlofchad had the immense gall to stand where they knew that they could stand and take that identity and take it for themselves, which means that the closing of Bechia itself is achieved in terms of Teres Hashem to me by the recognition that the Bris Yom V'Layla is a growing process that stands in each generation in the most immediately powerful ways and can never ask itself, so how could I possibly have achieved this since Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do it, so how could I do it if he's Hema Bochim? So how can I be the one that's going to create Bochim? And that's exactly the Nakuda of Mokum Yinichulanu Avasenu Lizgader, by which the Rishonim explain has nothing to do with literally that they left it undone. Obviously, says what I mean, you can't what to be. Chizkiyahu is not going to burn the Nechushtan because he wants somebody else to do it. I mean, it's Chizkiyahu's father's Golf of the Doors never bought. I mean, obviously, it doesn't mean that. It means it works out that way because you're not aimed on this Nakuda. So you figure if Moshe Rabbeinu made it, the Noach Hashanah Choshes, who am I to burn it? He's the only one that figured out why it's him to burn it. Okay? And this Nakuda of Chosen and the relationship that it has to Teres Hashem to Mima, which is the very thing that prevents Avedis Kechavim, is profoundly Nogea, the Yahrzeit of my father's Zecher, Tzadik Yivrocha. And that is because one thing that's amazing, especially during the last months of his life, every time that I saw him, he always would ask me, can you explain to me how it is possible that I am the only one that knows how to understand anything?
Yeah, to do what?
And it was really true.
Understand?
He's the only one that understands how to read this Gemara, how to read that Gemara. It doesn't make any sense. Why should I be different? Because it is so clearly and obviously true. This is the right shot, and everybody else is mad. So I'm like, what is going on? How could such a thing be? That question bothered him so profoundly because the alternative is that he's insane. And if somebody thinks that he's right and everybody else is crazy, so then any normal person realizes that that's a prime ingredient of insanity. So, I mean, is there an explanation for it? Is there a logical explanation for it so that I could feel that there's some And the truth is that this Nakuda is precisely that Nakuda, because the incredible mixture of an individual had the most intense covet for where he came from, but unbelievable covet for where he came from, and yet in total and absolute disregard of anything that was assumed to be true by where he came from. And the recognition that whatever had been achieved was achieved so that it would be possible to be made and to be mechadish in ways that are fearless, and recognizing that the same way that a generation changes, those generational changes are changes in the nature of my Bereshis and in the responses that are called upon in order to be able to achieve a tikkun that leads ultimately to Geula and to become the Yeseda Yesedis, V'amud HaChokmas Kula, provides a person with a Migdal Oz in which the Malachei Asharis themselves don't know what they're talking about. And they're all coming Bikshu Latfa, and they're not Hinami. So you ask, where does that come from? So Rabbeinu Bachya says where that comes from. It comes from the nature, as he says, the way kikfir, like a lion cub. So a lion goes out to attack. It's absolutely certain about itself. There's no doubts that I'm going to need some help from somewhere else. This is me. A very strange way to compare to a tzaddik in his bitachon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the exact opposite. So I'm boter b'Hashem. It's not me. As he's saying, it could be the same lashon as a fear. Ella the pshat is, remember that Rabbeinu Bachya's own approach to bitachon is totally different than everyone else's approach to bitachon. Rabbeinu Bachya's approach to bitachon is that the person's own achievements within Maisa Teva, which is the basis of what Adam is created for, becomes the vehicle for the presence of the Shekhinah in what he's doing. So Mamela L'Shitosai, the individual is filled with a complete and absolute bitachon, has nothing to do with the idea of in God I trust, or even in the Jewish kind of religious things, trust in Hashem, He'll take care of things for you. It's rather the clarity that your Maisim have provided for a Mokum of Ashras Hashchina, where there is the place where it's possible for things to happen. And that's a totally different idea of Chosim, of power, of Migdal Oz, of being able to actually fly without getting tired, as the pasuk puts it. So maybe this 17th Yahrzeit, a lot of years, maybe this 17th Yahrzeit is finally a beginning of an understanding to the questions that were bothering him himself. But it's really true that the uniqueness of those two dargas, of a chosen and a commitment to Teres Hashem Tamima, an honest commitment to Teres Hashem Tamima, is totally rare. I mean, I don't know if I ever saw it elsewhere, to see such a complete belief that the Teres Hashem is Tamima. That there's not one Nekuda, not one Diuk, not one Rashi. Now, there's nothing that isn't absolutely 100% Shalem. And if there's something that isn't, it means I don't understand it and I need to continue to work on it. It's like today's an unbelievable Gemara and Baba Kama, right? So there's two words in the Torah that we don't understand. We don't understand what in the world it says Chamor in the parsha of Bor, Alibid Rabbi Yehuda. And there's nothing else in the whole Torah to understand. That's right. There's nothing else. And I don't understand why the word Se appears in Hashavas Aveda. The whole Torah, those are the two words we don't know. It's an unbelievable thing. It's like Fermat's final theorem. Somewhere there is a proof about what those words are. We're still working on it. 1,000 years later. It's an unbelievable way of saying things. Amazing hashlama, which gave me so much to know that there's nothing that doesn't have to absolutely be showing. It can't be something you just put under the carpet. Right, it means be'erach, it's sort of. There's no such thing as sort of. There's no such diak that's sort of. It's exact, it's precise, it's meaningful, And the sillier it sounds, the more incredibly meaningful it must be. So you have to go for it, and you can spend the rest of your life on it, but you need to be able to see the Teres Hashem Tamima. That comes from an immense power of Chosen, to have the guts to be able to recognize that whatever it's Mechayev, no matter how crazy it sounds to everybody else, as he would always say, Das steht da. That's what it says here. Like it, you don't like it, makes no difference. This is what it says. Now go put it in your pipe and smoke it. But that's what the Torah said. So Rabbis, I want to thank you all very, very much for coming and spending all of this time, having the patience to listen. I want to thank my dear wife Tzipora for the amazing public. She put in for so long before. She prepares a long time. I should probably answer exactly that's Chosen.
That's especially my father was that's how he was such an undemanding person. There was nothing you could do for him when he was alive. He would thank you for everything you did, but not because he asked for it. If I could be Mahana's Nashim and do all this for him, it's not very discussed.
That's not true. There was always a radish. It was
A radish and a pickle.
That was like the maximum request.
Radish and olive oil.
Und dem kein Leposek Tznoin Mel
Yeah. All right, Yasha. Okay. Amen.
Divine. I was understanding that Nachla was part of Chosen, but that Yerush, but then it sounded like what we were talking about is all the Chochot is actually the true Yerush. That if you, like if Pinchas has Nadav and Aviv and Aaron's Yichus,
It's the other element of Nashim, which is access to Meshivas Nefesh. You can take over a Nefesh that has its mokum. Because it's there. It's not something that's just part of a flow. It's there. That stands the there. So none of us knew what they achieved. The Nekarach, what they achieved, and so on and so forth. That has to be taken. Can be taken by anybody. Go take it.
well, Yibur is almost like there's a soul bank.
That's right. Hebrew is the soul bank.
But when you have that, you have. Is that
I forgot to
Yerusha?
mention that. I think I did mention it. You mentioned the shop, right? The shach who says that it's not only Soda Yibur and Gilgal. Which Nogea Dafka Yisrael. Which causes two things. Gilgal and Soda Yibur. I didn't say that. It's a shach for Soda Yibur.
I wasn't here
Huh?
for
We said another chef.
We said the Gilgal. It's on this, so that
My daughter had a baby, we had a poor Chris.
The shach also brings here the Rabbeinu Bachya, makes a big fuss of Rabbeinu Bachya about the why Nashim are the one that were so that I don't know if I even mentioned him, but he does. There is another shach.
What's Nachla and what's Yerusha?
What is what?
What is the difference between Nachla and Yerusha?
Ah, that we have to wait for the next time it comes out on Pinchas. Different elements. There is an element of flow. An element of flow, and there's an element that's mazola and nozel, mazala, which is nozel and nechalim. Kinechalim natoyu, which relates to Nachla. Yeah.
What?
The whole parashat ha'ibur in terms of soda ibur. Whereas the aspect of Yerusha, which is Yerusha, is where it stops. Nachla is where it runs, because it always goes back to the Nachla.
So I thought that was my understanding of what Rebbe was saying. So during your lifetime, you're running with Nachla.
Yeah.
Right.
Your Yerusha gives you this Nachla. It gives you this Nachla. But it's such an amazing thing, because really people are mizalzel on what they have, because they think it's a Yerusha the way going at Yerusha. That's really the way they look at it. They look at it as something that it's in your hands to do what you want with now. And, it's not yours in ultimate sense.
Right, they wasted it.
Huh?
You're looking outside, getting a degree of this or that.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of
Yeah.
doing what
Whereas
they
in
can do.
reality, it's so totally definitive review. And it makes all the difference in the world. Yeah. So to us, you can be Mizal from Yerusha also. I don't need that. What do I care? Give it to somebody else.
It comes even with Easter.
Yeah, it's very
It's moment for Easter.
That's the way, exactly, yeah, that's exactly true.
which
That's
is the
the way it
exact
is.
opposite of Eliyahu's Vayochal, Vayakol, Vayelech. It's very
No.
meaning when Eliyahu gets up to go to Kadosh Baruch and say I'm done.
Right.
And he says Vayochal, Vayakom, Vayelech. The same as the opposite of Esav's before he goes.
The Asa.
Yeah. It's a very conscious thing on both ends.
It's funny because
No, all I did was be Zion and Yerusha.
Right.
Rabbeinu Bechia says that what was funny about Moshe Rabbeinu not needing to ask Hashem was because everyone understands that if there's no sons, then the daughters should get the Yerusha. Even the Moshe Olam understand that.
Right.
So how come it was something that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't?
You're asking?
I'm asking, yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of explanations.
No, I'm saying it goes a bit counter to this.
Well, no, I mean, it doesn't go counter to it because Moshe Rabbeinu was Berachim. The way I understand, the reason he was Berachim is because he created the idea of Halo B'Lechtachem. So the problem, the consistent problem with Moshe Rabbeinu is his dvekus to the door of Yahrzeit Mitzrayim. Because of that, Vayese Rosh Hashanah, and so that says he becomes the one that's Mizake. The door Hamidbar that were Yahrzeit Mitzrayim ultimately to the Knesset. So that means that this idea of Halicha is so powerful to him. And the danger of Amida is so powerful that he doesn't want to assert at all. So he doesn't want to defend, especially at this point. He feels it's already was, after this Maaseh. But I mean, that's part. Listen, the way I understand is that every one of the Shiva Harim fails because of his Maya. Right? So in other words, because the idea is to bring out that Nida in its totality, as if that's all that there is. What would be with this Nida if it wasn't offset by? So as Avram Avinu is destroyed by his chesed, essentially, which creates Ishmael and the chesed Shochinam and all the problems of Lot and the problems in his own movement. Yitzchak in the end is destroyed by Din, by creating Amalek and so on. Yaakov Avinu's Tmimus is what makes it impossible for him to be mischaber directly to Yosef the way that he should be, and so on and so forth. Moshe Rabbeinu's incredible commitment to Netzach means that he can't afford to stop in that sense. And the Lechtach HaYimanu is that sense of die of each moment, in which it's impossible to say that it should be a chosen of now. The totality of that's why he has so much problems with Rabbi Akiva. He can't understand Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva has so much to do with this. By the way, that's the name Zimri. It's like, the same thing. The Zimri means a cut-off piece. Right? Like to be Zomer, or Zimra Saaretz, which is Nogea, Zmires itself, which brings us back to David HaMelech and Zmiros Ayilichu Kecha, which the Medrash actually relates to Moshe Rabbeinu's failure here. It says, you see that people fail. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu can fail because he said, that's the Medrash I'm sure you're aware of, so because of that, he was Nichshal, but that's why David HaMelech was Nichshal, because he says, Zmiros Ayilichu Kecha, but he's named Zmiros Yisrael, for God's sake. That's his whole Madriga.
That's what he does.
Right? That's my business.
But it's a problem.
That's what I'm saying. That of course it's a problem. In each and every one, it's a problem. But the problem is the shirish of your entire existence is to bring out this problem. That's what you're here for. In other words, Avram Avinu in being sacking chesed, and showing ultimately that Magen Avraham has to lead the din. then it has to lead to Tikkun of Tiferes and so on and so forth. The failure in him, and that's what it says, that Lo Nitzah Avram Avinu Ela B'Shvil Yaakov Avinu. Right? This is B'Shvil Yisrael, Aman Yisrael. So it's because it was all this was of Yaakov. And yet it's B'Chachot Min. How do you explain that? So it should be, on the contrary, it should be Chot Min Yaakov Avinu. But it's not true. Because all of this was a Totzah, that incredible immediacy of the breakdown of Chesed, which is part of the Tikkun of Chesed. So it's the same way that Bria itself, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu breaks down in terms of Shviras HaKelim. So why is that? That's coming because of the Keiches of Bria and Hatava to create. That has to lead to Shviras HaKelim, which then has to lead to the deep for Tikkun and so on, everything that's associated with it. Otherwise, it's limited at the beginning. That's like that beautiful sforno. There can't be limits. Things can't be done with kliyut in English again. How do you say Kila in English? Yeah, there's nothing stingy. There's nothing stingy about my separation. You create a universe that is just like endless. Why be stingy? Because any stinginess means that it's all being adjusted for you. But the whole point of my separation is not being adjusted for you. It's all there. That's the beauty of it. It's unbelievable. The same thing is true of the Avei Sa'ilam and the Raya. It's all there. I see you'll say so it's going to being all there is going to cause tremendous problems. So what do you do? And that comes up so many times. Listen, so because there's there shouldn't be a sun, be a son and let them go worship the sun, the idiots. That's what they want to do. Obviously, things will be mikalkel because they're so good. So what are you supposed to not give them good? They want to ruin it, so let them ruin it. Fine. So you have to write a book to explain why not. Seriously.
Can I ask a question?
I mean, the Shita said it shouldn't have been a Briam there.
Why?
I need to create it to hide it.
No.
If there's no problem in Kilayut, so then why do I need to create the Aragonis? Let me just create the art that's suitable for the Zifon. I'm too stupid to realize, like Caroline at the Orkitos. If you're bringing the Aragonis, there's a riot that sometimes it doesn't give all the good, then it shouldn't have been.
I didn't say that he doesn't give all the good. I think that you still find that there's nug of protective.
Well, of course, I could have gave Avram Avinu Yitzchak too. But the question is, what do I need to do it in the first? Because it's basically meant to be total. First, we start off with everything. Okay, and we'll decide what you can handle at what particular point. That's the whole first story of my separation. It's everything. Vayichein. There's no Vayichein. It's never even happened after that stuff. So what? First, talk about the whole thing. And then you can realize, okay, here's where I'm at. That's the whole fun of my separations, is that it's just so insanely endless. Imagine, you take all the fun out of everything if there are any limits.
Can I ask a question?
You are.
It's too late.
The tikkun of Nachal, the way that Pinchas seems to relate to it, especially in terms of the ultimate relation, right? Is that it seems the way Rabbi is explaining it here doesn't seem to be a steer to Reish Lakish. It's still, in other words,
This is too complicated.
What?
It's too complicated. We'll talk about it separately. It's not.
Ready?
Too many layers.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Rabbi seemed to be explaining that Zimri did seemingly have a thought process that he was doing this as part of Chosin because he was relating himself back to Shimon and in his own mind he had a
He had it all worked out.
Yeah, he had
Obviously, I mean, Shlomiel ben Tzuri Shaddai, for God's sake, it's not, this is major stuff. I mean, he's not in the Sea Shevet Yisrael for no reason.
So could Rebbe explain more of the Havdalah that was necessary for Pinchas to say you're crazy and I'm the right one, where everyone, what was it about his approach that left him?
It's 23 hours.
Justified, but not
Because,
really.
do you have the contrary? Now it's hard to understand what possible grounds there are for his approach. No, he was pestering me for days. The only the understanding of his approach is only if you go back in time. Once Pinchas existed, you can't even begin to understand what was he thinking. Was he crazy? How could it be Shevet be a sword? What's he tying to my show? They don't need Tirlacha. What do you mean Tirlacha? If I was Begayer, it was before Kabbalah Satar, but what are you talking about? He sounds like a nut. How did a nut get appointed to be a Shevet Yisrael? Because it's always like that. As soon as people understand something, there's no basis for how anybody could ever have thought otherwise. It's very, very hard for people nowadays to understand how it isn't insane to believe the kind of things that the Gemara believed, to believe the kind of things that the Rishonim believed. It sounds crazy, but it's not crazy because it's the only intelligent alternative at the time.
Maybe just made a jump, I think, to the aspect of Yiftach. He's also the nut, and where is he coming from? But all of a sudden, he's the representative of, he becomes Yisrael and says, this is our chelik. Like who? Right? It's a similar Pinchas type of, I'm going to stand here, I'm the one. Right? It just makes a connection.
I don't know how it's this issue.
No, where he just said now just gave me an understanding. It's conceptually.
Okay, but that was a Barnea warp. You're talking about a different circuit.
In that sense.
Okay. Thank you. Could you splice it and put it back in time at the right moment? Yes, but getting back to one of my favorite example was actually pointed out by Stephen Jay Gould. Right? So he says, to us, it seems so insane to believe that reproduction is achieved by homunculi, right? I mean, like, how stupid could you be? Endless little tiny humans in little tinier testes in each generation, all locked up into every human being who's carrying around 1 billion generations of little tinier and tinier and tinier. And this is right at the time of the Rishonim, They talk about if you look at Zera under Megadelet, you'll see little boys in it. It's hilarious. Doesn't come off it, man. Like, what are you talking about? Right? But he points out, you don't understand how intelligent this was. Because everybody else believed in some kind of vitalism. An intelligent person knew that the information has to be stored somewhere. It's clear that there's an ongoing relationship of one generation to the other, so you get to be things suddenly appear, min hashamayim. Since at the time there was no concept of information storage other than analog information storage, there's no other alternative. So it's insane. You're right, it's insane. But state. What am I supposed to do? Believe in some meshugana, or it's stam, it just pops up? The moment that everything changes and information takes on a completely different meaning and so on and so forth, and translatable storages, and obviously you look at it as being stupid.
So
each thing is like that. So as far as Zimri is concerned, he's back at a stage where you need to ask, like the Rambam is discussing to you. Don't think that Shlomo HaMelech wasn't Megayer his wives. But I think Shlomo was not Megayer his wife. Right? So why is it that we talk about Nashim Nochrias? So we need to be mavar the different levels of gerus. And if it was at the time of the Malchus, and maybe there was already ulterior motivations. What's the din of ulterior motivations vis-a-vis gerus, which becomes whole sugyas that become muvur gradually during the course of derus and so on. At that time, when I'm talking about Shomi Tirlach, and what's the answer? So you were Megayer, there's no Hilchos Gerin. Well, I understand. How did you take Yisro's daughter? But what's the difference between where state? I don't understand. This is an Isser somewhere. Go find out if there's an Isser. Allah Maisa. Is there an Isser in sleeping with an Aramis? Big Machlokas Rishonim. What's that? I'm saying so. I mean, what? This is so boring to you. All of these things are so boring. Somebody's coming to join Yisrael, not start to join Yisrael, but Chabad Yisrael, sending from the Malchus Mamish, the Bas Melech, to be able to be Bizdabik to Yisrael, which becomes all Allah of Yefas Torah ultimately. And you're telling me, and this is the way that the Gula is going to come. Exactly like this, from these women. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, you can't attack B'naz Moab because we need them. So I'm attack B'naz Midian for. So maybe I say Midian just because of Moab. What's the big deal? It's so bored to you. Now it's bored to you, but at the time, I mean, the whole thing is up in the air. Who knows about these things, or what is considered to be ulterior motives? What is Nogea the Geras? What are the procedures that would be Makabel Geras? When the Rambam says Makabel Masamiyad, what does that mean, Makabel? You really believe you could sit there and argue with Zimri even today? I doubt it. No, it's easy, La'akramais, with 2,000 years of perspective, or 3,000 years of perspective, saying, I don't know what he's talking about, he's an idiot. It's very difficult for us. And the same thing with Bilam. When we come and understand who Bilam is and what it is that he was and why the Torah. No, everybody makes fun of everything. Sure, we know this is silly and that's silly. Nothing is silly. But that's part of Chosin. That the achievement of every door makes things look silly. Sure, it makes things look silly, which is part of the incredible reality that things are getting infinitely better, not worse. To anyone who is Shayach to Chosin. It's just that 99% of people refuse to acknowledge Chosin. So instead, they see no development. They see the same problems, but without any intelligence, so it's a lot worse. And they don't understand that the moment that you would stop and build from where you've stopped, you're talking about a totally different universe that is light years ahead in so any possible way from anything that was, including even Havanas HaTorah. The only nafkamina is in terms of liba, which is chas. And that's what the person has to work on. In terms of the intelligence, the rapidity, what do you mean? 50 years ago, people could not learn Shas. There's no such thing. One person out of a million would be a Yodea Shas. Now, any child knows Shas. What's the big deal? If I can memorize Harry Potter, why can't I memorize Shas? I'm shorter than Harry Potter. But seriously, it's not an issue. Every time Dick and Harry learned Shas, there was no such thing as 50 years ago. It was inconceivable to take Amei Haaretz and be able to teach them a Daf Yomi. They would have no idea what they're talking about. People couldn't think in that fashion. How could you possibly take an Amei Haaretz to teach them Shas? Things have changed completely. It's not a big deal. People know Kol HaTorah Kula, and it's nothing. These are unbelievable changes. And the fact is, there's more people that have more access to more Yediyas HaTorah than a woman. You give a woman an education, she doesn't have to think. She thinks out of her rear end. Well, it was shy to give a woman an education. What are you, crazy? You're going to send her to school and she'll be made to Torah, Tiflis, the Kalus Laita, and so on. The women are now the only ones who know how to learn. The men are total washouts. I mean, because of that, they have these crises. Nobody to marry. These poor girls have nobody to marry. They're so far ahead in understanding and in seriousness and humanity than these idiotic yeshiva bachram that it's mamish bizyonis. So how did that happen? How did all these changes happen? And then mamish people don't even notice. The whole world is completely and totally changing around them. You're honest. All of this is functions of chosen, and the reason there's no response to it and no changes is because people don't realize what chosen means. So basically, if this is the way it's done, this is the way it has to be done. So it's unbelievable. The power that he gave to Pinchas, and that's the power of Gula Mamash. It's really a power. It gives you a sense of immense. It gives you a sense of migdalos. It gives you a sense of chazak. We still use that word in my modern Hebrew. Chasinut alumit. Chasinut alumi is the recognition of what we stand for, basically. That's all. The chosen lumi. Yeah? Somebody who's pogea at the leftists are pogea at chosen lumi. People stop believing in what they are and what they stand for. So you can't stand up. It's like what's happening in America. They lost all chosen. They don't belong anywhere. They didn't come from anywhere. They're not going anywhere. They have no sense of history or placement and no interest. They're not even stewards. They're nothing. Evet kiyim lo. Mamish the puzzle.
Maybe you talked about also before in the established the modern parenting issues. Are we ornaments in that here or?
Yeah, no, I think it's true. It's very true. Modern parenting is a function of missing closing. The idea that children are supposed to be, I don't have the right to tell my child this is the way you're supposed to act. This is what you have to do. No, instead of, so what would you like here? So here are your choices. You could do different beyond belief. The result is children that have mamish, no connection to anything, no respect for where they came from, nothing.
Teachers have to deal with
They
it.
may end up with nice B-days because you did, but it's basically it's suicidal. Horrifying. These kids that went from South Africa to America last year, they literally could not believe it. They were working in camp because in South Africa they're still human. There's still a tremendous sense of cover where you come from and so on and so forth. So I've never saw anything like it. I was getting emails like from Gavi, from Kobe, from all those guys. It was a nightmare, Mamish. And this is like, an intense rechuk from the entire idea of I have where to stand. I have nowhere to stand. What's that? Gabriel, the guy that read the Indian guy.
Oh, I've seen a lot.
What's his name? Your children are not yours.
Look back at that nostalgia.
Escape coming in phasic in my old age. Yeah. You know who I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about.
The parents are
Who is that Indian guy?
They're killing them. They're crippling them.
The spiritual guy that everybody loves.
Deepak Chopra?
No, that's much later.
Today,
I'm sorry, never mind.
today, Sadhguru.
I didn't ask that.
Oh,
Moshe, I'm glad you were able to come.
It's a privilege.
All right. How long? When do you have to leave?
I'm leaving August 10th, but we've done nothing except select the ulam as yet.
Except when?
Select the ulam. So I have to get everything in order
Oh wow, where is that?
in Rehovot.
That's great. They have the yellow page advertisement around here. We need a new line.
Oh, yeah.
Let's take the yellow. Need an orchestra. Yellow pages. Need a caterer. Oh, yellow pages. Oh, I just forgot the collar. Thank God that's okay. Very cute ad. A little bit dated. It's very cute.
I wish it were that easy. I mean, I could pick them, but my column has to be happy.
Oh yeah.
That's another story.
Okay, Besorot Tovot, keep me in the loop.
Okay.
Yeah.
To know that.
Wonderful.
Monday, September 19th.
Wow.
I'll send an announcement. So.
It's a shame. Shad Tova. Yeah. But you see the practical implications. That's the most Moshe's point. It's the most practical point.
It's almost.
You see the way people raise children. It's entirely a function of this, how much chosim they have. And they remove the chosim from the children. The children are left mamish, rudderless. It's terrifying.
Can maybe talk more about the practical applications?
Smack.
Shut off the.
You have to know who you are when you talk to a child.
What do you do if you don't have a sense of close on yourself?
You shouldn't have children.
Too late.
Take a chosin test.
Okay, Rabbi Say.
That's what they also call the whole vaccine. So they're the anti-vaccine movement.
Yeah.
So the response to them, they call it the Chosin Aleumi because the Chisun is a vaccine. Also, you Google Chosin Aleumi, you'll find that as the vaccine, pro-vaccine.
The pro-vaccine.
Chosin Aleumi.
As well. All the young people want to
Yeah, that was actually a real thing. They were very annoyed about it.
Right.
Yeah, they were actually
I saw
very
it.
annoyed that old people got to vote.
Yeah.
Right. Which is such a transformation. I mean, we used to think, the young people, you got to be at least 30 or 40 to have a say in. Now it's like the old people shouldn't be voting.
Yeah.
What do they know?
They're gonna die anyway.
What do they know about life and about what's important and what's?
We were saying
Good,
that
Rabbi Say.
Malcolm Manichali Avosai is not only they left from me, but that I'm drawing from the Avosai, but it's a different stress.
It's probably the same lashon. He's gathered the same lashon as Panot Godrot.
Alright, maybe. Yeah.
Sweetheart, did you get your mail?
Yes. So
Okay.
just nothing else. Just that pink letter.
I think just bank letters.
Okay.
There were a few bank letters.
That's my. All right. Fine.
Okay, thank you for coming.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We'll to see that.
Although everybody apologized that they had to leave, Shmuel had to get up from the shoot tomorrow.
Yeah. So I said that 100 times. Everybody should leave. I said earlier, everybody.
Yes, get up tomorrow 5:30.
Of course.
Won't get home till after.
Of course. They should have left earlier. I told them.
They wanted to stay.
What can I do? I couldn't talk any faster. All right, so light it down.
Guys, can I give somebody a quarter of a piece of a watermelon? It's a beautiful watermelon. It's gonna go to waste. Can I give it to anybody?
There you go. Sivi loves watermelon.
I don't know it's going to take longer to digest the sheer of the food.
You got to take his iPhone home.
I have to take what?
Make sure you take his iPhone.
Okay. Take his iPhone?
You busted it.
What am I going to do with it?
Not again. It's been years.
I've been used to it.
And this is a real onus.
What should I do with it?
It was crazy.
Mail it to his friends.
Oh, okay.
Don't bring it in because it might even be still on the road.
I can bring it over to them. They live in 5 towns, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So am I.
Oh, you live in the 5
In the
towns?
summer, I live with my grandparents in Lawrence.
Oh, fantastic. Great.
Drop it off.
Great.
Yeah.
Just make sure it doesn't leave shards of glass here and there.
While you're at it, see if you can recover.
Story.
See if you can recover a few $1,000 little hard drive that you lost.
What? On the phone? Oh, no.
I can't believe that you're allowing somebody to take something for you. You're not frightened of Vita Canada Vita.
It's broken anyway.
One more Saturday break. Wait, there's a hard drive in?
No.
No.
Oh, okay.
It's a hard story. Show it to Benny.
The phone?
Yeah, Benny might have an answer for it.
What's this? What happened?
A weight fell on his phone in gym. It detached from a thing and fell directly on his iPhone, crushed it to bits.
Did the motherboard survive?
Yeah.
We think so.
Yeah, the motherboard's fine. The screen is
You
so
sure that-
damaged that the touch screen is like completely
Digitized
You can plug a phone into a computer and
What?
access it.
Yeah, digitize it. That's
Verizon
the
can
thing
do
that
it.
sends to your fingers.
I have a guy.
Screen of one
who
unit
can do
that
it.
can do it.
Yeah, you just
Oh,
plug in.
but
He
it's-
broke his
it's
screen and he
expensive.
answers his phone
It's
through a computer.
expensive to replace it.
I've done about the new ones. iPhone 4S, I was
Amsterdam
changing. They're only like
Library survived
$10.
the
Oh,
Holocaust.
that's
In,
one.
I've done about-
This is-
Herzog,
this is one of the
Finnish library,
CSS.
what's it called?
Check the prices.
This is a Shulchan Aruch
No,
from
but the-
before
that's
the
just for the
graph, 30
screen.
years
You
old.
have
So
to
it doesn't
do it.
even have
I
a
can
graph.
do it.
Wow, it's cool. I take a picture.
That's very
The
cool.
Amsterdam
Not 6, but
library in
I think they're mostly the same
Which
series.
number is this?
Yeah.
Sure.
It's 7. Cool.
I have that
Yeah.
also.
Jules
I'll
Simmons.
mix it up.
This is
That's the name of the show. So
That's the last time anybody saw
Oh, of course, yes.
Wait, so on the phone,
The Amsterdam library. The whole library that so that was some of the skipping.
You can do that.
Was brought to Gush Etzion to Harvard Yeshiva. So this is the Shulchan Aruch.
Yeah, but there are people who
Years
if the
doesn't even
Verizon
have
store
the-
or Nachi said he knows somebody, because if you
Simcha
can transfer
Banks.
it, you probably can. But
Yeah, and he probably doesn't even let you
Right, before he was born.
put in the passcode.
all the other
But you don't have any Kedusha Adraim.
to Verizon, so they can do it.
Whatever it says you have here.
It's around 400 shekel from eBay.
It's much cheaper than
Oh,
that.
of course.
It's the 6S or the 6?
Success.
I took pictures
No,
of
that's
all
Use
kinds.
screen.
No, but
But yeah,
Especially
he's
that one,
got it stolen.
that's because my friend's name is
I've
Tom.
changed 4 and 5s, assuming they haven't completely changed the system. I can do a 6.
Wow.
I'm sure I have to keep it.
One night I changed 200 iPhone screens.
What? You've done?
200 in one
You've
night.
changed 200 in one night?
One night.
My gosh.
Sold
He's the man for the job.
Yeah.
But I've never done
Wow.
a 6S.
Wow.
But it could be
One
it's
man
the same.
factory.
Sales a two-man factory.
So you and Yaakov?
Another guy, a guy called Tov Levi.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.